In around 2009, TouchWiz was introduced as Samsung's custom layer built on top of Android. It replaced the clean, minimal look of stock Android with a completely redesigned interface, bundled apps, and a long list of additional features. The goal was to simply make Samsung devices feel more advanced, more capable, and ultimately more appealing than competitors using untouched Android. Their approach, however, turned out to be way too excessive. Samsung loaded its phones with duplicate apps, like its own browser alongside Chrome and its own email client next to Gmail, just to name a few, while also adding entire ecosystems of services like Samsung Hub and its own App Store. On top of that, carriers often added their own software, creating devices that arrived cluttered with dozens of pre-installed apps, many of which couldn't even be removed. This noticeably affected the performance. Even flagship devices like the Galaxy S3, S4, and S5 frequently struggled with lag, stuttering animations, and slow system menus. The hardware was great, it was just the sheer weight of TouchWiz running in the background, consuming RAM and processing power. In many cases, competing phones with weaker specifications ranked as faster and more responsive. And with all that bloatware, a phone advertised with 16 gigabytes of space often left users with barely half that available, which made users feel like they overpaid for what they actually got. One of Samsung's most controversial decisions was actually about hardware. For years, many Galaxy flagships were released in 2-chip versions, Snapdragon models in North America and Exynos models in Europe and other regions. They were identical and had the same name and price. Between roughly 2018 and 2022, Exynos chips frequently fell behind. Users and reviewers documented lower gaming frame rates, more stuttering, and weaker sustained performance compared to Snapdragon versions. Exynos phones tended to drain battery faster, and under heavy workloads like gaming or camera use, were also more prone to overheating and thermal throttling, reducing performance further. Even the camera experience wasn't perfectly consistent. Despite identical hardware, image processing could vary slightly, with some Exynos models showing weaker HDR or slower processing in direct comparisons. This led to what many call a chip lottery, where you paid the same for a worse phone if you don't happen to be in North America. The reason Samsung even did this was because developing Exynos in-house allowed for more control and potential profit, while also reducing reliance on Qualcomm amid supply and licensing constraints. But the backlash peaked by the Galaxy S20 and S21 era. The gap between Exynos 990 and Snapdragon 865 was large enough to make the issue mainstream, finally forcing Samsung to improve its chips, partner with AMD, and eventually ship the Galaxy S23 with Snapdragon chips globally. In August 2016, Samsung launched the Galaxy Note 7 as one of its most important flagship devices. It had a premium design, top-tier specifications, and massive anticipation as it went directly against Apple's iPhone. Early reception to it was strong, and the phone was seen as a major step forward for Samsung's high-end lineup. Within weeks, that momentum collapsed as reports began surfacing of phones overheating, catching fire, and in some cases, exploding. The issue was traced back to the lithium-ion batteries, where internal failures caused short circuits and led to fires. These weren't just one-off or rare incidents either. There were reports of phones igniting in homes, cars, and even on airplanes. Airlines around the world responded by banning the device entirely, and you couldn't use it, charge it, or even bring it on board. Samsung initially attempted to manage this crisis with a recall and replacement program, offering safe units to customers, but this backfired when replacement devices also began experiencing the same exact issues. At that point, Samsung had no choice but to discontinue the Note 7 globally and recalled millions of units, even shipping fireproof boxes for returns and urging users to power devices off immediately. It was later found that design flaws from tightly packed batteries and separate manufacturing defects across suppliers were causing the batteries to short circuit. Samsung's financial loss reached billions, but the reputational damage was arguably even worse, forcing Samsung to be a lot more careful with its hardware moving forward. In 2017, Samsung introduced Bixby, an AI assistant, alongside the Galaxy S8. The goal wasn't just to match competitors like Siri or Google Assistant, but to innovate and create a deeply integrated assistant that could control nearly every aspect of a Samsung device, from apps to system settings, and that's exactly how it was marketed, with features like voice commands and visual recognition. But when it was released, people found it to be mostly useless. Compared to Google Assistant, Bixby was slower, less accurate, and far more limited in what it could actually do. Even Siri, which was often criticized at the time, felt more polished. Key functionality, including Bixby Voice, was delayed in several regions, leaving users with a dedicated feature that wasn't fully usable. These problems were more noticeable because of Samsung's strange decision to include a physical Bixby button on the device. Pressing it would launch Bixby instantly, and early on users couldn't disable or remap it, and most presses were accidental and annoying. Samsung also pushed Bixby aggressively into its interface, even attempting to position it as a replacement for the default, which was Google Assistant. But most users already preferred Google's solution, which was more reliable and familiar. Without a clear advantage in everyday use, Bixby saw low adoption, and despite later improvements and a reduced annoyance, it never caught up to its competitors. When Samsung presented the Galaxy Fold in 2019, it was seen as a genuine futuristic innovation. This was Samsung's first foldable device, priced at nearly $2,000, and the idea of a phone that could unfold into a tablet generated massive hype, with even Apple starting to pay attention, but that excitement collapsed almost immediately. Before the public release, Samsung sent early units to reviewers, and within days, serious problems began to appear. Multiple reviewers reported screens failing after just 1 or 2 days of use. There were many general issues ranging from flickering displays to black spots spreading across the screen, and in some cases, the entire display not working. One of the most notorious problems though was about the display's top layer. It looked like a standard removable screen protector, so several reviewers naturally peeled it off. Doing so, however, permanently damaged the screen, and Samsung never clearly communicated that this layer was essential and not meant to be removed, which is obviously quite annoying. The hardware of the phone seemed to prioritize the folding ability over anything else, as small gaps in the hinge allowed dust and debris to enter the device, which could press against the screen from behind and cause internal damage. There was also a visible crease in the middle, which made the device feel less polished and premium than what people expected. Samsung ended up delaying the launch, redesigned key components, and only re-released the device months later. These fixes did work and improved the phone's durability, but the initial failure and the visible crease made people realize that a proper foldable phone wouldn't come until another couple years. Around 2020 and 2021, Samsung introduced a decision that surprised many of its own customers, that being ads, which began appearing inside core system apps. They were pre-installed apps like Weather, Samsung Pay, Samsung Health, and the Galaxy Store, so advertisements were showing up in places that were supposed to be part of the built-in phone experience. These ads took several forms. In some cases, they appeared as banner ads embedded directly into app interfaces, such as at the top of the Weather app, blending in with the design. In others, users received promotional push notifications that looked like normal system alerts, advertising deals or Samsung services. There were also occasional full screen promotions inside apps like Samsung Pay. This update wasn't for budget phones, it was for flagship Galaxy S and Note models, often costing over $1,000, and instead got advertisements built into essential apps. Many of these apps couldn't even be fully removed, meaning you couldn't just avoid the ads by removing them. Paying a premium price for hardware while still being treated like a user of a free service just felt scammy. Combined with Samsung's existing reputation for bloatware, people were quick to attack them for this change. Following tons of complaints and negative coverage, Samsung reversed course in around 2021 and began removing ads from its core apps, largely resolving the issue by the end of that year. You've likely never heard of GOS, short for Game Optimizing Service. This was a built-in Samsung system designed to manage performance, reduce overheating, and stabilize gameplay, which is normal, and most other smartphones also throttle performance under heavy load to protect hardware. Samsung, however, had a very poor implementation. Users discovered that GOS wasn't just affecting games, but was throttling performance across more than 10,000 apps, including everyday applications. At the same time, popular benchmarking apps like Geekbench and 3D Mark were excluded. This meant that when reviewers ran performance tests, the phones operated at their full power, showing strong results, but in almost any other app, the performance would suddenly be limited. It was weird since benchmark scores were good, but the actual experience wasn't. The phones had lower frame rates, inconsistent performances, and noticeable slowdowns, especially during gaming. The issue was even more pronounced on the Exynos powered devices, which, as you may remember, were known for their weaker performance and heat management. Once this behavior was exposed, Geekbench responded by removing several Samsung devices from its rankings. Samsung's reasoning centered on heat and battery control, as newer chips were running hotter, but they did exclude benchmarks while limiting real apps, so it appeared that the company was trying to maintain high scores for marketing purposes, and that was as much of a critique as the actual performance issues. After all the public pressure and loss of trust, Samsung finally released updates allowing users to reduce the throttling. In mid-2024, Samsung launched the Galaxy Buds 3 as its latest flagship earbuds, priced around $250 and meant to compete directly with Apple's AirPods Pro and Sony's weirdly named earbuds. They pushed a new stem-style design along with LED blade lights, which was a noticeable shift from previous Galaxy Bud models. Expectations were quite high, but within days of early units reaching customers and reviewers, users reported uneven assembly, visible gaps in the casing, and misaligned components. Even small details like inconsistent LED brightness between earbuds made the earbuds feel unfinished. Probably the biggest complaint though were the silicone ear tips, which would tear during basic removal. Some users also found that one earbud wouldn't charge properly or required constant repositioning in the case to make contact. On top of that, there were some complaints of inconsistent audio quality, weaker than expected active noise cancellation, and occasional technical issues like connection instability or unusual sounds. Samsung publicly acknowledged the problems, halted sales in key markets, and promised improvements to quality control, which just made most people choose AirPods instead. But as of today, most of these issues have been fixed, and I wonder what the next big controversy with Samsung will be. But I hope you enjoyed the video regardless. Leave a comment about Samsung and how it compares to other phone brands, and thank you for watching.
Like, comment, and subscribe.